Oh, hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to the Women's Engineering Society's Electric Dream series of Heritage Open Days. I'm Helen Close and I'm the Heritage Manager for the Women's Engineering Society. Thank you very much for joining us today from what sounds like quite a long way away. Jennifer, thank you. Can I ask you to mute your microphone so we don't get any dogs barking in the background or Amazon delivery doorbell rings? We'll be recording this, so if you don't want to be seen, please turn off your camera or change your name on your screen if that's appropriate. And please drop any questions into the chat and we'll ask our speakers later at the end. The Women's Engineering Society was formed in 1919 in the aftermath of World War I, during which time women were called into many different fields, including the engineering sector, to fill roles whilst the men were away at war. When the war was over, the law required them to leave those jobs. WES was formed to help support and maintain women's roles in the industry, and it's still our role today. But unfortunately, only 16.5% of the engineering workforce in the UK are women. Every year, WES takes part in the Heritage Open Days to share the history of some of our incredible women engineers with the public and to promote engineering as a career for young girls and women. And this year, we're highlighting and celebrating the 100th anniversary of the formation of what could be called an offshoot or a splinter group or the daughter of WES, the Electrical Association for Women, and the role that it played in promoting domestic electricity. And so I'd like to hand over to our guest speakers today, Dr. Nina Baker and Dr. Eleanor Peters, to tell us more about the EAW. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Helen. What a lovely opening. Good afternoon and thank you very much for attending this talk, which explores the unique work of the Electrical Association for Women in a Scottish context today. Thank you to the Women's Engineering Society for hosting this event as part of the Heritage Open Days programming. Nina and I are very excited to share the history of this remarkable organisation. As Helen said, 2024 marks the centenary of the founding of the Electrical Association for Women, or EAW. Today, Nina and I are going to offer some insight into some of the EAW's activities, promotional campaigns, and training courses in Scotland. We will evaluate the wider network of EAW members and women who mediated between consumers and the electricity industry in 20th century Scotland. We will close with some historical reflections and interpretations of the EAW and the organisation's legacy. First, just a few brief words about the aims of the centenary celebration and the steering committee who have made this all possible. So today's talk is part of Electric Dreams, a festival of women power celebrating the centenary of the EAW. The festival honours the role of women in the development of electricity in the home and highlights today's innovators in sustainable energy. Our group of academics, archivists and engineers have organised a range of activities from digitising EAW records to hosting engagement events between school children and women engineers across the UK. This has been supported by SSE. We aim to celebrate and inspire the women who are shaping our energy future. A brief overview of the founding of the EAW. The EAW emerged from the wider interwar women's voluntary movement. So in post-World War I Britain, a group of women engineers, feminists and aristocrats wanted to educate all women in the science of electricity and contribute to its safety and standards. Their chief ambition was to bridge the gap between the electro-technical and domestic worlds. They aimed to do this by busting industry jargon for women and providing consumer feedback to industry professionals. This established the EAW as a mediating body, and they were active for 6 decades until voluntarily dissolving in 1986. The Women's Engineering Society, founded in 1919, supported women in engineering and played a key role in the EAW's formation. WES helped women fight for employment rights after the restoration of the Pre-War Practices Act of 1919. And women engineers relied on organisations like WES to safeguard their interests and create a network of like-minded professionals. It was in 1924 in the WES journal, The Woman Engineer, that Mabel Matthews, an electrical and production engineer, developed the idea of the EAW. Matthews asserted that there were numerous reasons for the slow uptake of electricity in the home, notably the issue of costliness and the inability of electrical engineers to reach and teach a people whose language they do not speak. Matthews was convinced that most women did not realise what a boon electricity can be to them. For women to benefit from innovative electrical engineering, an organisation which could stoke real desire and enthusiasm was needed. Certainly, in the interwar years, electricity struggled to compete with gas and solid fuel, which dominated the domestic energy market, as manufacturers of electrical appliances tried to gain a foothold in an already crowded market. In response to Matthew's paper, a meeting on the 12th of November 1924 at the home of Sir Charles and Lady Parsons established a Women's Electrical Association, renamed Electrical Association for Women in 1925. WES members, engineers, and women's groups decided the new organisation would offer training and help the electrical industry engage women who needed to be persuaded to take up this expensive and notoriously hazard prone electrical utility in their homes. Caroline Heslett, as featured on the screen, was an electrical engineer and electricity industry administrator and a driving force behind the EAW, serving as its director until 1956, and she was the first WES secretary as well. During World War I, she gained engineering experience at the Cochrane Boiler Company in Scotland, persuading them to train her due to staffing shortages. Hazlitt believed engineering could elevate women's social status, and she saw electricity as a way to free women from domestic drudgery. The AEW, headquartered in London, expanded rapidly through provincial branches similar to the Women's Institutes. By the 1930s, there were 80 branches, growing to 202 by 1960. Membership included housewives, domestic science teachers, women MPs, and aristocrats also served as branch presidents. I'm going to hand over to Nina now to tell you a little bit more about the Scottish EAW branches.
So thank you, Eleanor. Here on the left, you can see a typical syllabus card. This one is for Glasgow branch in 1964-65 as an example of the mix of technical and general housewifely topics that might be offered to members. So that year they were going to do visits, outings to the Cumbernauld New Town, which had just completed its phase 1 construction. They went to the West of Scotland Agricultural College, the Scottish National Institution for War-Blinded, the Scottish Design Centre, and the Lions Bakery. And they also had talks and demonstrations, and the picture on the right is of a group of Aberdeen young electrics, typically much younger housewives, having a demonstration on the economic use of electricity from the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board. So talks were often coming from commercial companies which had their own travelling lady demonstrators. Kenwood Mixers gave a talk. Persil washing powder talked about planning your home washing. The fire brigade talked about fire prevention in the home. And there was the ever popular Christmas cookery demonstration by the South of Scotland Electricity Board Homecraft Advisor. In addition, branches offered the home electricity courses from time to time, and many visited power stations. There were social outings, teas, lunches, and business meetings. Many branches ran explicitly fundraising events such as whist drives, bring and buy sales, etc., to raise money for local charities. Donations were sometimes just as cheques, but more often as some sort of electrical appliances. Next slide, please. This map shows the pre-war distribution of branches across the UK, but you can see from the list on the left that a lot more Scottish branches opened in the smaller towns after the war. Apart from the obviously larger branches in the big cities, it seems that Falkirk was extremely active, or at least they were very well organised as to getting information about their activities into the local press. Our archives are patchy and widely scattered, but even for Glasgow, we only have a few of those branch syllabus cards that we saw earlier, although we have just been donated a lot more material from Helensburgh. Next, please. So the purpose was educating the women, and one of the association's most important and unique activities offered to members were the courses in electrical safety, electrical homecraft as it was termed, from which participants would get a certificate and a badge. These courses were also offered to other women's groups, such as the Seroptimists and the Women's Institute, and many housewives went home with one of the series of educational tea towels as a reward. The courses would cover electrical safety, how to wire a plug, replace a fuse, read a meter, and some very basic engineering in the form of cutaway diagrams of what was inside a cooker, iron, kettle, or hoover. This was all aimed at encouraging those women whose homes only had electric light to feel comfortable starting to use electrical appliances too. Later on, many appliance manufacturers seem to have toured the country giving talks about their products, often with a raffle prize of one of their appliances. So this was something of a two-way dialogue, as the appliance industry got to hear direct from their consumers about what they wanted. Next, please. It was also about educating the girls. And right from the very start, the Electrical Association for Women had links with girls' organisations. The Girl Guides, which had been founded much longer ago in 1910, from their very beginning had an electrician's badge, which was really quite demanding for a schoolgirl. The syllabus required her to make simple electromagnet, understand how battery cells worked, how to make a simple circuit, how an electric bell worked, and how to give first aid to someone who had had an electric shock. The badge itself was later moved from the guide syllabus to the older girls' Rangers section with a little more theory, and seems to have been merged with more general science topics in the post-war era. Interestingly, an almost identical badge and syllabus is still part of the Indian Girl Guides programme. The apparent links between the EAW and Girl Guides became obvious from the very first issue of the Electrical Age magazine, with each issue having an article specially aimed at guides, or perhaps at their leaders, and some were quite technical, but written in the form of a story. And we're trying to find out if any of the early EAW leading lights were also in the Girl Guide movement. Unfortunately, I haven't found any pictures of guides attending these talks and courses put on by local EAW branches, but here are some of the girls from something called the Women's Junior Air Corps, learning to wire 3-pin plugs. The Women's Junior Air Corps was the predecessor of girls being admitted to the Air Cadets. The EAW put on talks for schools and sometimes invited older schoolgirls to their own branch talks. Next, please. Lady McColl, who was president of the Glasgow branch, donated a cup in 1969 in her name to go to the school or technical college which gained the highest average marks in the EAW's home electricity course. The cup is currently in the Glasgow Museum's collection, but not currently on display. And here we can see students at Falkirk Technical College receiving the cup for that year. Next, please. As well as the courses in electrical safety, the EAW took part in many exhibitions, both national and local. For the 1938 Empire exhibition at Bellahouston Park in Glasgow, the EAW display in the Women of Empire Pavilion included a specially made diorama entitled Waterfall to Washer to show how hydroelectric power supplied electricity to home appliances. Next, please. This is a photograph of what it looked like. It's not very clear, but they were clearly trying to show the direct connection, particularly in the north of Scotland area, between the hydroelectric power and the local homes. Next, please. The Glasgow and Inverness branches were able to arrange special displays in local museums, typically showing histories of the electrical domestic appliances, as well as promoting the association. Other public outings to promote the association and its electrical safety message included taking a stall at the Royal Highland Show at Ingliston near Edinburgh, and this other photo at the Helensburgh Show in 1971 features a Mrs. Nancy Shearer, the branch chair, and Mrs. Kerr on the right. And I only know this through the wonders of Facebook, because Mrs. Shearer was also chair of the EAW's Scottish Council and we've been able to get some of her archives. On the back wall is a poster promoting the EAW's campaign Electricity for Every Woman, and the poster the women are holding shows the new wiring colours for plugs. So the wiring colours for plugs were changed in both the 1970s and again in 2006. Next, please. During the Second World War, most branches continued to meet, but their activities were directed more at the war effort. Glasgow raised enough funds to buy an all-electric mobile canteen van along the lines of the ones run by the Women's Voluntary Service. Many branches also joined the national mania for knitting, for making comforts for the soldiers. The wool for thousands of scarves, gloves, jumpers and other items was either bought from the proceeds of their own fundraising events or donated to them by other groups, such as the wonderfully titled Edinburgh Anti-Gloom Club. Some branches sent their knitted items to a ship or unit they had adopted or to depots for redistribution. Mrs. Falconer from the Edinburgh branch was moved to pen this poem for the electrical age in the winter of 1940. Clickety-click, the stockings grow, clickety-click from heel to toe. Meeting now, we members sit, nimble fingers swiftly knit. Sometimes 20, sometimes 10, 50 now and 60 then. Stitches like the pounds amount to millions in our daily count. Twist and turn, tormented things, uncoil in slithering, snakish rings, evolve as scarves, all snug and warm, to comfort men in wintry storm. Jumpers, mittens, helmets too, cast-offs given welcome true. Mars defies the holy writ, so men must fight and women knit. Next, please. In the post-war era, there were other opportunities for fundraising and service. The Scottish EAW, but particularly the Glasgow branch under Lady McCall's leadership, raised the money to pay for the electrical lighting at Iona Abbey. EAW records say that there was a plaque commemorating the EAW involvement, but the only photo the Iona staff could provide is this one about Lady McCall's chairmanship of yet another organisation, the WVS. Many branches raise money for small electrical appliances for donating to local hospitals or charities. Next, please. In 1974-75, the EAW celebrated its 50th anniversary. And here we see Eastwood District Council's Parks and Recreation convener, Councillor Joan McFarlane, accepting a commemorative bench at the top of the steep stairs in Clarkston Park, just behind the local library. This is just to the south of Glasgow. The steps are still there, but no bench. The lady in the plaid coat is the branch chair, Mrs. Moffat, and the lady in the middle in the white coat is Mrs. Shankland, the founding chair of that branch. Other branches made similar donations in that year and 10 years later in 1985. Next, please. There were many types of celebrations, including dinners, lunches, teas, etc., and of course always cakes. Several branches managed to persuade their local parks department to plant trees or install floral tributes in the form of the association's badge. And here is the one from East Kilbride, but Aberdeen and Glasgow did them too. So I'm now going to hand over to Eleanor and she'll talk about the professional side of EAW's work.
Thank you, Nina. So from its founding, the EAW had ties with domestic science teachers. Dorothy Melvin, as featured here in her academic robes, was principal of the Glasgow and West of Scotland College of Domestic Science, and she forged a very strong relationship with the EAW. She was described by her contemporaries as small in stature but lion-hearted, and she chose to introduce household electricity courses at the Glasgow College and prioritise modernity, aligning electricity with scientific progress at the college. Melvin aimed to position her college as progressive and counter the claims that domestic science education was somewhat outdated and conservative. The adoption of gleaming cookers and streamlined refrigerators, irons, vacuum cleaners, and washing machines had the power to transform her college into something that was forward-looking and could sit among the academic institutes of Glasgow. The domestic science colleges in Edinburgh, now Queen Margaret University, and Aberdeen, part of Robert Gordon's college, also followed the Glasgow College's example. So during the 1930s, the AW and domestic science teachers worked together to introduce a new and exciting subject in domestic science colleges across Britain. This was electrical housecraft, which applied basic physics to domestic technologies, covering electricity theory, appliance use, and meter readings. Basically, it aimed to ease women's concerns about electricity while promoting and marketing it to the many students who were attending domestic science colleges at the time. In Glasgow, students practiced dismantling plugs and sockets, and with the housewifery teacher, Janet McCurdy, they built a 4-foot electrified model house complete with miniature switches, lamps, and domestic appliances. There's a picture of the model house there. The model was featured in the Electrical Age magazine as an exemplary exercise in electrical housecraft. Janet McCurdy's sister, Mary McCurdy, she was actually also head of cookery at the college, and she wrote a recipe column, a frequent recipe column in the magazine. By 1939, 59 of the 66 students earning electrical housecraft certificates in Scotland had actually, in Britain, sorry, had actually been trained in Scotland. The partnership between the EAW and domestic science teachers was beneficial for both parties. Caroline Hazlitt noted that domestic science teachers today had attained a recognition throughout the world that was undreamed of not so long ago. Working with the EAW was casting domestic science in a new aspirational light, and in return, the EAW had very enthusiastic supporters of electricity, pushing their educational agenda at a time when the uptake of electricity was quite low. In the summers of 1932 and 1937, the EAW held a 5-day electrical housecraft summer school for domestic science teachers at the Glasgow College. Attendees came from across Scotland, including Orkney and the Western Isles. The Glasgow EAW branch helped to organise the event with Lady Belhaven and Stenton, then president of the Glasgow branch and domestic science advocate, opening the 1932 session. In her welcoming speech, she declared that electricity was the alleviation of drudgery for women of all classes. The Glasgow College's resident electricity expert, Mary Andros, demonstrated the generation of electricity in the college laboratory using bells, irons, vacuum cleaners, and washing machines. Students were encouraged to inspect the apparatus for themselves, and they also received technical lectures, equipping them with knowledge that somewhat exceeded what was necessary for using electricity in a domestic setting. One of the lectures was concerned with the merits of opting for a steel conduit system to provide structural support for electrical cables. The Scotsman newspaper saw the domestic science teachers as missionaries spreading the gospel of electricity, asserting that these women would make a lasting impact upon return to their hometowns. 40 women imbued with the pioneering spirit, if they came from 40 different towns, might do more to realise the aim of the Electrical Association for Women to bring cheap electricity into the homes of the poor than 1,000 from Glasgow alone. The woman is not apathetic who will arrange to give 5 days out of a busy life to the study of electricity. She is more likely to spread what she has learned in her own hometown when she returns. Again, in 1937, the summer school saw domestic science teachers, this time from all parts of the British Isles, invade Glasgow with screwdrivers, scissors, and pliers. A University of Glasgow science graduate, Margaret Parker, was then touted as the college's specialist in electricity, and she delivered much of the summer school programme. When the EAW introduced a diploma for demonstrators and saleswomen in 1931, domestic science colleges became responsible for priming students to become competent and confident electrical appliance demonstrators who would provide a key interface with consumers. The syllabus for the diploma was prepared as a joint effort between the EAW, representatives of the electricity industry, and domestic science teachers. In Scotland, all 3 domestic science colleges delivered the diploma training, preparing demonstrators to work in lifestyle exhibitions and showrooms. The EAW viewed the diploma as necessary to professionalise the demonstrating role, reflecting that the training of demonstrators had been haphazard and an unsatisfactory state of affairs before the diploma. The idea was that a diploma gave women demonstrators increased importance and a status of their own, and resulting in demonstrators taking greater pride in their work. It helped to change the nature of the work from something that was temporary and somewhat transitory to a more respected permanent position with career progression. By December 1932, over 132 diplomas had been issued across Britain, and job advertisements for demonstrator posts began to stipulate that applicants ought to possess the diploma. Dorothy Melvin rather optimistically suggested that a demonstrator working for the electricity companies could earn up to £300 or £400 a year. Beyond their demonstrating work, Scotland's electricity mediators were involved in several other ventures. They wrote cookery books and they joined professional organisations such as the National Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs, bit of a mouthful. The club sought to equip women with formal meeting skills and training in public speaking to prepare them for professional life. Demonstrators also joined philanthropic organisations like the Sir Optimus Club as well. In post-war Scotland, the electricity industry required demonstrators to fulfil a vital role as figureheads in rural communities, performing as an all-round mediator between consumers and their supplier. Lord Airlie, who was the first chairman of the North of Scotland Hydroelectric Board, requested the help of all the Scottish EAW branches to stimulate interest in electricity among the people living in the remoter parts of the country. The EAW had tight connections to the Hydro Board. Lady McCall, who Nina's already mentioned, then president of the Glasgow and District branch of the EAW, was also the wife of Sir Albert Edward McCall, who was the CEO and deputy chairman of the Hydro Board. The Hydro Board was distinct for its autonomy and the fact its power was generated by water, unlike the other electricity boards, which were chiefly relying on coal-fired power stations and were controlled by a centralised British Electricity Authority. As pictured on the screen, the Hydro Board served all consumers roughly north of the Clyde and Tay estuaries, and the southeast and southwest boards covered the rest of Scotland. The other image features a Hydro Board demonstrator, and you can see that there is a mirror above her workstation so that her audience can see how she's preparing the recipe in front of her. Dangling the opportunity of careers for Highland girls, the board desired promising girls from Highland districts to be sent to domestic science colleges to gain proper insight into scientific methods of cooking and training in the use of all kinds of domestic electrical apparatus. Then they will be given charge of a district where they will pass on this knowledge by demonstration, do simple repairs, induce the consumers to increase their dietetic range, and undertake monthly meter reading and account collecting to ensure sympathetic and regular contact between consumer and supply authority. Lord Airlie's emphasis on using women demonstrators as mediators between the board and consumers indicates that there was concern regarding energy transitions in the north of Scotland. Demonstrators were the key to encouraging changes in behaviours and domestic routines. Recruiting local women as demonstrators to travel from town to town and enter private dwellings was a unique response to address these issues that were distinct to rural Scotland. For decades before the formation of the Hydro Board, there had been an anxiety over the impact of hydroelectric schemes in rural areas. Environmentalists and Scottish nationalists had feared that the beauty and resources of the Highlands would be exploited without any benefit to the inhabitants of northern Scotland. Some feared the schemes would actually deprive Highland women of water supplies and worsening their domestic sanitary conditions. Demonstrators played a critical role outlining the benefits of electricity to Highland householders. Their presence at the Hydro Board's publicity events and showrooms would have been very reassuring because it represented the prioritisation of domestic consumers over industrial demand. It was hoped that electricity would improve living conditions, create jobs, and therefore help to stem the tide of rural depopulation. Certainly, to bring electricity to the people of the Highlands, expertise, creativity, and self-reliance was required. Here in a couple of the publicity pictures from the SSE archive, the Hydro Board makes a delivery of an electric cooker to a black house. And in the other image, the electric cooker is being taken by boat to its new home. This photograph was actually taken in Shieldaig, Wester Ross, where the total village population was about 90 at the time. After a customer's installation had taken place, demonstrators would then visit, often making very long journeys to those living in faraway places, and this was to ensure satisfaction and assist with any cookery queries. Here, an Orkney-based demonstrator, Edna Petrie, speaks of her arduous journeys to reach remote islands. Having grown up in Orkney, Petrie was quite unperturbed by her surroundings and visits to isolated houses. One of the housing surveys conducted in her childhood had actually found that half the houses surveyed in Orkney had been unfit for habitation, so she wouldn't have been surprised by anyone's living conditions, put it like that. Her intimate personal knowledge of Orkney, its housing difficulties, and environmental challenges posed by island life made her an asset to the Hydro Board and her customers. In this quote, she describes a typical journey to a district when the inhabitants were supplied with electricity for the first time. She acknowledges the significance and excitement of the occasion, downplaying any kind of personal discomfort. Then everyone would come for miles. Then everyone for miles would come, and we'd have demonstrations and general discussion lasting far into the evening. Equipment and demonstrator were ferried to the island by small boat, which was tossed in the fast-running tides. At such times, the sincere appreciation of the audience more than made up for any inconvenience. An inconvenience is hardly the word to describe the thrill I got from these unusual journeys. Another former demonstrator, Mrs. Harriet Taylor, maiden name Perry, who worked for the Hydro Board in the early 1960s, shared her memories with me in an oral history interview. Here she is giving her van a good clean in the picture here. Later, Harriet assumed the role as a chairman of the Inverness branch of the EAW. Although initially when she started in her role, she did not actually hold an EAW demonstration certificate, Harriet applied for the post at the Hydro Board because she said she felt inspired to help people who hadn't used electricity before. In our interview, she reflected, I had a bit of a cheek applying for a demonstrator post when I wasn't qualified for it, but it worked out okay. Instead, she had actually taken courses in domestic science and institutional cookery in Aberdeen, so her qualifications were applicable. Although based in Elgin, Harriet's district covered a wide geographical area as shown in the map on the screen. She would pack up her demonstration van, full of ingredients and pots and pans, and then drive for hours, often at night, recalling that she often didn't return to Elgin until gone 10 or 11 o'clock. Hydro Board electricians would follow in a separate van to assist with setting up any electrical equipment that were required at a public event. She spoke about the camaraderie of working for the Hydro Board, her fellow demonstrators all meeting in their vans to have a wee confab. In our interview, she actually spoke about the need for this inbuilt confidence to do demonstration work. She recalled that networking was required between branches of the Scottish Women's Rural Institutes and the Church Women's Guilds. The Hydro Board also ran public speaking competitions for employees and encouraged the demonstrators to enter the women's section of the competition. Harriet recalled being made to take part and coming second in one of the competitions. It was also vital that demonstrators could quickly build a rapport with their audience, and this was enabled by adopting the local dialect in demonstrations. Harriet recalled giving a demonstration in Keith in northern Scotland and thinking, I'll slip in a bit of the Doric, which is a dialect spoken in the northeast of Scotland. And slipping in a bit of the Doric won over her audience, who applauded her. Harriet explained that once her audience understood, she's one of us, they were at ease. She explained that an outsider who might have attempted to put on airs and graces would not have been accepted in the same way as a demonstrator who spoke like her audience. I'm going to pass over to Nina now to discuss some of the EAW's legacy.
Thank you. In 1986, the terribly hard decision had to be taken to wind the association up. Although many branches considered themselves to be still thriving, the fact of the matter was that overall membership had fallen markedly, and the industry, which had provided the lion's share of the association funding for the headquarters and employed staff, no longer felt it was so relevant to their needs. This problem had been in the offing for several years, but head office had managed to persuade the industrial funders for a while, but not forever. Without that funding, it was impossible to continue, so rather abruptly as it must have seemed to many branches, the EAW closed down at the end of 1986. However, we today are fortunate that there are a number of important legacies, the most ubiquitous of which is the 3-pin plug with its safety shuttered socket. This was the culmination of a long-running EAW campaign which started in its earliest days with the Electrical Outlets Survey and campaign. The safety features we take for granted are by no means universal in other plug systems around the world and derived from the 1947 British Standard BS 1363, the provisions of which include these safety features which Dame Caroline Hazlitt insisted upon. The strength of her argument was partly technical, but also social, as she was able to point out that she was voicing the opinions of millions of housewives. And although the British Standard has been updated since then, the basics remain the same. The 3 pins, one of which is the earth pin, protects users from electric shocks, and the plug also has an internal fuse. Next slide, please. The other feature is the safety shutter, which means that no little fingers or any other foreign objects can be poked into the live parts of a socket, because they're barricaded by a spring shutter that can only open when the long earth pin is inserted, as on the right-hand side here. The safe use of electricity was one of the association's strongest messages to members and to the public. Next, please. The association's campaigning and educational materials were not just about safety or how to cook on an electric stove. From the very beginning, it provided regular articles and hints and tips leaflets about energy efficiency. Initially, it was about the actions a housewife could take to use the electricity less wastefully, such as by putting lids on saucepans to keep the heat in. But both publications and courses also taught them how to read the meter and gave an understanding of the consumption of each type of electrical appliance. Prestigious competitions were held through the Electrical Aids magazine, in which members might be asked to send in their own energy-saving tips or to say what the consumption of various appliances might be, for which quite lavish prizes were provided by electrical appliance manufacturers. As technology developed, later editions of the magazines even started to talk about nuclear power, household insulation, and even the newly emerging renewable energy equipment such as solar panels. They also promoted national energy saving schemes such as this Monergy 86 campaign, and would certainly have been linked strongly to today's energy efficiency organisations such as Changeworks or Home Energy Scotland had the association continued its work. Next, please. We are fortunate that the people winding up the association made sure to secure as much as possible of the headquarters archives and put them into safekeeping. They are stored at the Institution of Engineering and Technology's archives in London, although many branches chose to place their items with local authorities or universities' archives, so the history is quite dispersed. However, for the centenary, funding has been obtained to digitise all the issues of the electrical age, which are now online. Next, please. Branches were holding events right up to the last minute, as we can see in these photos from around Scotland of branches celebrating their own significant anniversaries in Dingwall, Glasgow and Edinburgh. Next, please. Glasgow was one of the many branches still attracting good numbers to its talks and other events, but there was no avoiding the inevitable, and all branches had to wind up their affairs as the National Association was doing. A few carried on under their own steam for a bit longer, especially those with some younger members, such as the Aberdeen Young Electricals, whom we saw earlier. Next, please. The EAW touched tens of thousands of women's lives across the UK, and it's quite likely that some of you or your mothers or other relatives were members. There may even be one of these badges or one of the many designs of EAW tea towels somewhere in the house. Do any of them ring a bell? We're particularly keen to locate any of the branch chairwomen's badges of office, which is the very elaborate medallion top left, we've only found one so far in Falkirk City Archives, and we'd love to know if there are any others. Next, please. We would love to be contacted by anyone with recollections or even memorabilia, and we'd now be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eleanor and Nina. Has anybody got any questions in the audience? I'll have a look in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask any questions, that would be great. Deathly silence. I'm pleased to say that we didn't have a short out of electricity whilst this was going on. We had torrential rain here and hailstones, which is still going on, and my worst visions of everything just cutting out, thinking, well, that just goes to prove how much we actually rely on electricity these days.
We didn't mention it because our talk was largely focused on the case study of the local branches in Scotland, but there is still an electrical association for women operating, not in Britain, but all the way across the Atlantic in Trinidad and Tobago. The ladies have carried on holding the torch. Still do, which I think is amazing.
Definitely. And I think we're planning, or we were talking about trying to get in touch with them as well from the steering group.
We must do something, definitely, yeah.
Definitely. So thank you very much for joining us, and also thank you to our guest speakers. Just a reminder that there is one more online talk tomorrow, which has been delivered by Anne Locker from the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and that will be on Margaret Partridge and her role in electricity and electricity generation, particularly, I believe, down in Devon. So thank you very much.